Okay, hello everyone. Back over to you, David.
Great. Thanks so much. It's my privilege to introduce Lisa Grimm, who's the Global Director of DAM at Novartis. And how fitting in an era when we're so touched by our awareness of pharmacology and of healing, that we have the chance to both learn and listen to someone who's a global leader in that, but also in what Teresa called understanding DAM as a program and not a project. And one of the things I've most valued about my work with Lisa over many years is she has a native understanding that this is approached as a sustainable process. It's sustained as a program and not a project. And how fun and fitting, since Lisa joins us from Dublin, that she's got that cool green background. Lisa, welcome. Over to you, and I'll be back when we go to Q&A in a little while.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you, David. Hello. Very nice, as always, to see you again. Wonderful introduction and a great way to kick the day or evening, depending on where you are, off from Teresa. Just really great, as David was saying, to hear that idea that DAM is not a project, DAM is a program, or another way to look at it as well is DAM is a product. And so looking to chat with you all today about how do you actually staff that for the long term, and how do you staff that globally? And as we get more into it too, how do you really staff that in a way that's going to ensure that the people who work for you have career growth, and really what's underpinning all of that? So a lot of the things Teresa mentioned earlier, you'll definitely hear as some of the themes I'm going to chat about with you today. So I know we don't have a lot of time, but I do hope to take some questions from you at the end. So with that, we'll dive right in. So a little bit about me. So me, yay. I know I need to actually get a new photo because my hair has been purple for about 5 years. Obviously, it was still sort of its natural color when this photo was taken. But as David said, I'm the Global Director for Digital Asset Management at Novartis. I've been with Novartis for almost a year now, actually moved to Dublin in January. So again, similar to Teresa, the last time I did any real traveling was just before lockdown. I was actually going back and forth to the Novartis offices in Basel, Switzerland, which is the headquarters, and in East Hanover, New Jersey, while moving to Dublin at the same time. So a lot going on there. But and also, as David mentioned, I have been doing digital asset management and enterprise content for the better part of 20 plus years. I was actually at Amazon most recently before moving to Novartis, so doing a lot of stuff there on the taxonomy side. But before that, like Teresa, I was in Philly for a good long time, so worked for places like GSK, Drexel University College of Medicine, the vet school at Penn, and before that, various other companies, both in New York City and in Silicon Valley and in the UK before that. So I've been around here and there all over the place, always very much in the sort of enterprise content world. And I know this is the part people enjoy when they meet me at conferences in person, like to have a beer with them, because I am a BJCP certified beer judge. Sometimes I get to write about beer history, other fun things that come up about beer. So outside of DAM, always happy to have a beer with someone. And whenever people are allowed to travel again, more than happy to introduce people to the beers of Dublin. We have much more than just Guinness, so hope to meet some of you in person again at some point. So with that said, diving into something I'm going to be touching on a lot. Any of you who've heard me speak before know that I am very excited about governance, and I'm also very excited about memes. So I like to bring those two things together anytime I'm talking about digital asset management. But the fact is, governance underpins everything to do with your DAM, and especially when you're thinking about DAM as a global program or a global product, especially when you have so many different people involved, so many different ways of working. And frankly, as your DAM gets bigger and bigger, you really, really need to keep revisiting who's involved. You need to keep revisiting how they're involved, but really more than that, and again, to pick up on what Teresa said earlier, you need a lot of these people to be permanent parts of your organization. This can't be something where you have some quick ins and outs. There are places where that's appropriate, and I'll talk about that a little bit, but again, you can't really have governance if you don't have this long-term formal team structure. You want to get people out of silos, absolutely, but you need real people, real teams that are going to grow and evolve as your DAM grows and evolves. So, first of all, thinking about how do we even define global? Is your DAM global just because you have users all over the world? It may be. But again, too, do you have people who work for your DAM all over the world? Really think about, your user perspective. Again, always have the hat on of thinking of your DAM as something that's going to continue to evolve. It's not something that's a one and done. So really think about where your users are now. Where are they going to be 6 months from now, 12 months from now? Really kind of, if you can have that 3-year roadmap, maybe you're only supporting 1 or 2 countries right now, or maybe you're supporting one country with, say, 3 languages, which is certainly a very common use case, or even if you're in Canada, you have to have at least 2. So always thinking about those things. But think about where your users are and think about what kind of support model they need. And that support could be, they need someone who's kind of on the hook to do tech support for the DAM, in which case maybe you don't need as big a team, but it could be that they need someone to help them develop new processes. They need people to help them evolve the functionality. There's so much more there that you can think about, and you really want to think about what those feedback loops are. But again, that's all governance. We'll get into that a little bit more. So again, global, thinking about the languages. It's not just about the languages people are, that you're finding on assets, but really thinking about, are there compliance or legal things behind which languages you support? Again, if you're in a country that has multiple legal languages, you may well have a requirement to have everything available in those languages. And then you have to start getting into sort of thorny issues like, well, okay, is it just that they're searching kind of the full text that's available, or do you have to translate your whole data model? So if you're having to translate all of your taxonomy fields, that's a lot of work. Think about the governance for that for a minute. I will probably dive into this one a little bit further a little bit later. But again, just even if you have a very, very simple data model, and I'm going to land on this one for a while because I did spend a lot of time in the taxonomy team at Amazon. Just think about every time you make a change, how many countries do you have to replicate that change out to? How do you do that? Really just think through some of these very simple use cases and what you might need to support that in the long term. But again, you're always going to have to circle back with people from your legal and compliance teams as well to make sure that you're covering all your bases. You may think you're in good shape and discover, oh, nope, we're violating a law somewhere. So again, global may not be as easy as rolling out to a new set of users. You may have new rules you have to follow. And then, so I'll sort of step back into the governance piece. Who can upload and tag content? Do you have a team of librarians who do that? Is that something users do themselves? Is it a little bit of a hybrid there? You can go a lot of different ways with that. But again, what languages is it in? Do you bother to translate your user interface? Since with some DAMs, that's very, very easy. So what can your vendor do? With some of them, though, it's really very difficult, especially if you're coming from a legacy system, or even if you have a brand new one that's out of the box, but you need to configure everything. It's not necessarily as easy as maybe some of them say they are. And I know there's some folks from our vendors here, so hello, welcome. But I know even with the best of intentions, sometimes that's not as easy as we'd all like it to be for a variety of reasons. But again, it all comes back to governance, how you're defining global, and thinking about what you can automate, because we all, love the idea of automating more and more. But again, you can't automate until you have the people in the team that can actually help drive what that automation roadmap is going to look like. So, it's not as simple as flipping a switch. Even if you're going to have some super smart tagging, you need people to help train those models. So get into that a little bit more in a minute. But again, it's also about managing your scope. So we've all been in situations where you start with one thing, and suddenly by the time you're getting up to your launch or the time of your next release, you find out you have another sort of 400 user requirements that you didn't know about. So you really, really need to manage this, again, as an ongoing program, as a product. You can't just have a project that's ongoing. It's, we've all been in those situations, and no one wants that. So again, as you start to think about your team, do you have people in your team who are dedicated toward either the program or project management aspects of your DAM that can sort of take your people who are managers or librarians out of that kind of out of those sort of scheduling discussions, or potentially out of those things where you're just kind of trying to figure out, well, did we do X or did we do Y, to get you to an actual launch or something like that? You really need to think about, do you have people who are on the operational side versus people who are on maybe a project or program side who are helping to drive things forward? But Again, there's a lot we can get into there. Again, what your launch needs are versus what your business as usual are is something you need to sort of decide early on. You can change those things, again, governance, but decide how you would drive those decisions. Again, thinking about your interface versus your data model, again, back to this idea of how global is your metadata model. It's a really difficult thing to get right. Really, at an organization of any size, it's really difficult, certainly as in my current role, when you're dealing with life sciences, where you may have, for example, a pharmaceutical product that has 6 different names in different countries. How do you map that? And that's just one, one potential one. What do you do when you have something that maybe has an offensive name in another country? You really have to think through so many different things and think about how you are going to make changes to that, how you are going to figure that out in terms of rolling out things, from release to release. So again, a lot to do there. And this is why you need people on your team to help make these things happen. You need people to own these different actions that cannot all be one person. We've all been in so many kind of lone arranger situations. Anyone who's come into DAM for being a librarian or being an archivist, they all know that feeling well, but you really do need this team behind you. It can't just be one person. So that's really something to think about when you're trying to go in and have these discussions, perhaps with senior management, to get the buy-in. But it's not easy, but it's one of those things you really have to do, make the case. But again, back to sort of thinking about scope. Align with your vendor on what is and isn't possible, but think about what headcount do you need to support what you're doing now? What headcount are you going to need? Again, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Are there pieces, again, thinking about the automation, that maybe you can take the human effort out of, but maybe redeploy those people in different parts of your DAM? We'll talk about that a little more in a minute. But I think one of the most important things you can do to get buy-in for what you're doing and to frankly get the resources you need from a staffing perspective is to create and share your global roadmap, not just with your users, but with all those other stakeholders, whether those are your senior executives, whether those are people you're partnering with. You really need to get that out there, get feedback on it, really get people excited about what you're going to do. And also, you have to make some of those trade-offs too. Say, well, we're not always going to be able to do X by Y date, but here's where we'd like to have it. Have that an iterative process, but you need to share it regularly, and you need to really, again, get people to get that sort of excitement, that buy-in. But it's always going back to that idea that this is not a one and done project. This is an ongoing program or a product within your organization. It's never going to go away. Yes, it's going to keep costing you money, but it's going to save money in other places. So you really, often have to sell that sort of ROI story, talk about the efficiencies. And again, in some cases, you can always go back to that idea of compliance, that this is helping keep you out of trouble. So depending on what works best in your organization, you're going to need to sort of pitch it in a couple different ways. Then back to who's on the team. Again, there's this idea that some roles can be permanent, some can be temporary, especially when you're talking about a brand new deployment, or if you're, say, switching from one vendor to another. I think, again, a lot of us here have been through that experience. And when you do go down that road, you may have what we'll call sort of staff augmentation, either from your vendor or from a system integrator. And so that's certainly something where you can make that trade-off between, this is something maybe we need for 6 months, this is something we need for a year, but here's a role I see as being permanent and something we need on an ongoing basis. So good examples there. You always need your librarians. I'm always going to hammer that home, not just because I've been a librarian, but because everyone in DAM knows you need librarians to get things done. They have so many different skill sets that are applicable to DAM. But again, you want that role to evolve over time. But unless you have librarians there to manage your governance and to manage your data model, your DAM is not going to be worth anything. So I'm not going to make the not worth a damn joke, because everyone makes that joke. So pretend I didn't do it. But again, really try to make some sort of strategic thoughts over which roles are permanent, which are temporary, and try to get the buy-in on those for that. And really think too about where they need to be. And I know there's been a lot of discussion lately. We're all working remotely. Do they need to be anywhere? It may make sense that they are somewhere that's useful to cover a specific time zone. I think that makes a lot of sense. But I certainly am very much an advocate of getting rid of the idea of people having to come into a physical office, especially when the assets we're working with are all digital. It doesn't make sense that someone needs to be physically there in a particular place. You absolutely need to have a lot of meetings with people. You need to be able to discuss some of these things. It's great if you can be in person to have some of those kind of ideation discussions. But again, other ways to do that. And I would love to get to the point where we see a lot of DAM roles advertised that say, hey, location flexible. You can be wherever you want to be, just make it completely remote. But we know that's not the reality yet. We have to think about too, some roles are more expensive in some places than others. So you're almost certainly going to have that onshore versus offshore discussion. And, I think we're still in a place where, unfortunately, people with great skills, but who happen to live in a sort of, air quotes, cheaper country from a resources perspective are always going to get sort of the short end of the stick, may have to work unreasonable hours or sort of hours that I would say are less family friendly for anyone who's out there trying to do the job and cover hours in a different time zone. I know when I first started my role, that was technically in Dublin. I was still in Seattle, so I was having to, call into meetings that started at 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning my time. But for me, it was a short-term thing. It was temporary, since I was going to move. For other people, especially if you're working with people who are offshore, that's their day-to-day reality. So I think too, you can also kind of put the hat on of, do I want to be a part of that? And there may well be valid reasons for that, or do you want to try to sort of spread the love out, if you like, where you have people in different time zones working in a time zone that makes sense for them. So I think try to have the business hat on, but also just try to have the human hat on. How can you make these jobs ones that are going to be sustainable in the long term for people? So that's something that's sort of my personal thing. And also making sure you're teaching people to say no to accepting meetings at times that don't make sense for them. But anyway, get off my high horse there. But I think the other thing to think about too is, do you need language expertise? Do you need DAM expertise? And who's in the sort of core team? Who's in the expanded team? How do you kind of break that out without it becoming siloed? And there's certainly cases where you need that language expertise more than you need someone who's able to catalog things, or who's able to develop new features, or to really think about, again, what's in your product. But I think at the same time, it often doesn't make sense to have a whole sort of translation arm sitting within the DAM team. That's something you can sort of outsource, but you want to make sure you have some people who can still sort of sanity check that. And we'll get back into that a little bit more too. But here are the parts that I get really sort of passionate about and excited about too, is how can people evolve in their careers? How can they keep learning and growing and not kind of hit a ceiling? So think about the different seniority levels you need on the team, because there may be you sort of trying to get everything done, but what happens if you actually try to break that up into different levels, into different roles? Because we know as these things evolve, there's just so much work you could do. You just need to keep making the case for this to sort of belong to other people. Maybe you do have someone who's responsible for just working on the product side, or you have someone who's responsible for just the taxonomy side, or someone who is responsible for just working on integrations. There's so many different pieces and parts to what you're doing as a DAM team. And you need to think about making sure that you've got a place where you can cultivate new talent. Where can you bring people in who are maybe earlier on in their career? And where can you bring people in who are very senior, can kind of parachute them in and hope hope for the best, if you like. But there's certainly going to be room for all of those things. But again, how do you really encourage people to keep progressing in their careers without leaving? You want them to stay on your team as much as you can. But, there's this whole element around cultivating opportunity and around cultivating ways for people to continue to learn and grow. But it's also hard to do especially when a DAM may be a new thing to an organization, to explain to some of your senior leadership, okay, well, this person's going to start here, but I want them to be making this much in, say, a year or 2 years' time. That's not always an easy discussion to have with your senior leadership. But again, I think as much as you can try to pitch it again as an ongoing program or a product, people will begin to understand, oh, this is effectively a department I'm building. It's not something that I'm going to sort of forget about in a year's time. So really look at it that way, and think about too, how maybe you can rotate people in from other parts of the organization. I think that the great thing about DAM people is they have such flexible skills, sort of fungible, as they used to like to say at Amazon. But, that also means people can come in from other places and learn new skills, and you can kind of cross-pollinate, if you like. So I think it's really important to always think, oh, well, how can someone maybe on the marketing side come in and work directly in DAM? Or maybe how can someone on the DAM side go and be embedded maybe with what they're trying to do directly in the marketing side? Again, kind of share that love, if you like. And the tricky part is always thinking about how you get that funding. It's never easy. The conversations always had to be had, at that sort of senior level. I'm very lucky in my current role in that I have very, very supportive senior leadership, but not everyone has that. It can be a really, really tricky thing to get. And sometimes you're making the case for a couple years, frankly, before you're there. And sometimes if you've rolled out a brand new dam, it's going to take maybe a year, maybe two, before you start to see that sort of, oh, but we've saved money on creating new content or licensing new content. Again, trying to get beyond that sort of base level there, but you may have to kind of prove what you're doing before you can get those other parts funded. So it's never easy. Those are always hard discussions to have, but more than happy to share a little bit about what's worked and frankly, what has not worked. But again, you need that senior leadership buy-in to really make sure you're getting that broad-based team, because it's not just going to be one person. You need all of those different skills. Thinking too about what are some things that help, what are some things that don't help. Mentioned this a little bit before in terms of how you're translating your taxonomy. Automated translations are great, but obviously you don't want to just throw everything through Google Translate, not just because it's often wrong, but because there are certainly compliance reasons you can't necessarily share some of what you're trying to do, or it may translate brand names in a way that you don't want it to do. Obviously, again, back to governance, you still need a lot of work around here in terms of thinking about just what are your checks and balances around there. Another fun story from the past is, I won't say which company this was that I worked for, but it was a major online retailer. So I'll let you do the work in your head. But one of the romance genres got translated actually by humans, not automatically, into the German version ended up being extramarital romance when it was actually something very general. So again, a little bit of a chuckle from everyone on the team at that day, but if that goes live to users, you have to really think about, oh, what does that mean? And so again, automated translation can get you into trouble, but so can translation vendors. So you have to always think about who in your team can be the final check before new things like that go out. So translation memory is fantastic, where at least if you've got everything stored there for whichever language you're supporting, your net new pieces are the only ones you have to translate. So I am very excited about more and more DAM vendors having translation memory in there, thinking about too, how more and more DAM vendors have your localized image renditions. Thinking about rights management. I get very excited about rights management because I think we've all been in the situation where for years and years your organization hasn't really been managing this, often doesn't even know it's there. So that's something too where you can really think about, is this something you need to build kind of a whole army of people out? And maybe it's not a big army, but you really do want to think, is this something I could kind of spin off as a separate function if I had to? Again, you don't want to go into a siloed operating model, but think about some of the specialized skills that you might need within your particular DAM organization that you can evolve and grow over time. Back to this idea around how you're developing people. So again, I get very excited about that. But again, this all comes back to governance. You really have to think about that model. So I'm always going to spend a ton of time on governance because at the end of the day, that's everything. So when you're thinking about that team, you really want clarity on who owns which decisions, who's able to make those decisions, and what kind of input do they need. And that can be, something that even looks very simple on the face of it, saying, oh, I need to add a new metadata value for something. Okay, that sounds really simple, but sometimes you add a new value and it breaks some logic you've got built somewhere. Something that's very minor could actually be something very major unless you really know the inner workings. So you need experts on your team, and it's important, again, you have those experts you can cultivate over time, hopefully pay appropriately, and who can help cultivate the next generation of experts behind them. But again, back to the overall governance idea, how do you feed those requests into a global team? Do you have people at a local level who are kind of your eyes and ears? How do you get those in? Who can actually make changes? And changes, again, can be a lot of different things. Is that a change to your DAM configuration? Is that a change to your data model? Is it a change to your user interface? A lot of different pieces and parts there to think about. Think about who participates in those governance forums. And again, that's assuming you have them. You need them if you don't have them. So again, that's another thing where if you need to make the case for more people, say, well, we need people to help run these governance forums, and they need to be able to feed this decision and that decision back up to our team, so we can really kind of effectively have a global, sort of a global model, whether that's a centralized one or whether you've got people very distributed, very flat. Someone still needs to own those key decisions, and they need to make sure that those forums are working in a way that your users are able to feed things back to you, but also that the right people are making the right decisions. And I think, again, I called this one out specifically because it's a huge one. Who owns the relationship with your DAM vendor? Hopefully, if you do, if you're working with DAM day to day, you have a very close relationship with them. But you know, in a lot of huge organizations, especially, it may be in IT or it may be, you know, in procurement, somewhere else down the line. You really need to think about who owns it, but also who's driving the day-to-day and you know, what does that look like on the other end? So again, from your staffing model perspective, make sure people are owning some of these things, have that in the job description, and make sure it's really clear who's, you know, responsible, accountable. You want to think about it maybe from that RACI model. And again, think how it's going to evolve over time. Even if you're launching something brand new and you may not have the best data to drive decisions off of yet, at least take a stab at it. Say, we think in 2 years' time we'll be here. We think in 4 years' time we'll be here. You can certainly change that as you get new data, but really think about at least what you'd like to do, and then maybe what you think you're going to be able to do. And then there's going to be trade-offs in that. But again, always think about, where are the people I want to sort of develop going to be most useful at any given point, and where can they learn the most too? So again, even if you have people who are the best taxonomists in the world, are they going to be the best vendor managers in the world? Maybe not. Maybe they are in some cases, but again, you want to give people some of those opportunities. If you see a new role kind of evolving, help people to have, you know, get some time working in those spaces, and maybe it'll be the right thing for them, maybe it won't, but they've had an opportunity. So again, think about how you can kind of spend a little bit of time you know, cultivating those new experiences, new relationships, but keep your core team very much involved in the governance. That's what they're there for, is to help drive both what you're doing within the DAM, what content you've got in the DAM, and how it's going to evolve over time. So it's not just again, not just a one and done. This is a program or a product, not a project. And your team is going to be there for the long term. You really want to figure out how to stand that up and keep growing it. So think of it as a lovely garden that's going to keep growing and hopefully not have horrible weather or a pandemic happen to it. So with that, I will pause for any questions.
Well, Lisa, thanks so much. It's always such a delight to benefit from your insights and the many dimensions that you've come to manage the Global DAM Manager.
Yes.
We've got a couple of fun questions come in. One I'm going to conflate slightly. So the question is asked is, does your archaeology background influence your professional practice as a DAM professional? And I think we should also add, and as a beer judge.
Yes.
Which one influences your DAM competencies more?
Oh, which is more? That's a great question. But I would say absolutely, because one of the things that is so sort of part and parcel of archaeology is that there's actually two elements that are part of my day-to-day role in dealing with DAM. Is one, you know, you're always categorizing things, looking at it archaeologically. You have typologies, which map very well to taxonomies, and you can really think about how just having that sort of idea in the back of your head can really help. But I think the other thing that I've found so useful is you're always thinking about a sort of micro and macro culture, and what's happening sort of culturally when you're looking at something. How did X or Y evolve? And that's something you can always bring to bear, I think, when you're in a corporate setting, to think, well, what's the culture we're trying to cultivate, and what decisions do I need to do? What do I need to do as a leader to try to drive culture in a specific direction or another? And I think especially when we're in a time like this, where we're all sort of on our own to a certain extent, but together, you need to be able to model good behavior, if you like saying, I'm going to be out of the office and not checking email on X date, and you know, I still need to block my time to get some certain things done, and to have people, you know, oh, that's okay. I don't have to be on 24/7, even though we're all at home. So there's those things. But I would certainly say, as a beer judge, you're always testing and seeing what doesn't work. But you also want that to be, you know, constructive feedback. So especially when you're working with a vendor, you want to say, oh, hey, I really like what you're doing with this new feature, but this doesn't quite work. Have we tried X or Y? And certainly when you're judging beer, half the time you're saying, check your sanitation, or you know, too warm, but you want to give people something they can take action on and make it better the next time. So even if it's sometimes tough feedback, you want it to be helpful. So it all comes together.
It certainly does, and I knew you'd have fun with that too. Next question, and I'm delighted to say this started with the phrase "question from a student," and as you and I have talked about, there's now some truth to that statement, because we've got the great teaching programs going on from Henry Stewart.
Yes.
We have the program at King's College, and we have the Rutgers University professional program in DAM, certificate program. We finally have some standardization and educational opportunities in our field that all of us have fervently hoped for. And the question from this student is, do global DAM professionals need to be bilingual, or is it common to work with translators?
Well, I would say since my alternate languages are nicht sehr gut, then certainly not not required. I can do a little Spanish, a little German, and even less French. Although my Latin is pretty good, but not as useful in the day to day. So I would say it certainly helps. And I would also say I'm probably one of the few people on my current team who is not at least bilingual, but that's sort of more of a function of my company being very, very, very global. So it certainly helps a lot if you can be, but I would also say it's certainly not a requirement, especially once you're kind of at, again, this is sort of the cuts both ways part. When you're sort of at a higher level, you can get away with being less skilled in certain areas. So I have people who can do that part for me, which is great, but I've also sort of lucked out there. Certainly if you have more than one language that you're pretty good at, it's helpful. And I would say even if you just have a sort of basic reading ability, it really, really does help if you're just doing any kind of quick sanity checking or working in anything where you're cataloging or working with taxonomy, but it's definitely not a requirement.
Great. So we've had a few other questions come in that time will not permit us to get to today, but we will pass those along to you.
Please do.
And thank you everyone for sending the questions in. I wish we had all afternoon to talk to Lisa and benefit from her insights. Yes. Where speakers have given us permission here at Henry Stewart Events to post the recordings or any presentations, those will be available in the very near future, as they always are with Henry Stewart Events. We always ask, and we always hope that that will be okay.
Absolutely.
So we'll pass the other questions along to you, but on behalf of the Festival of DAM, thank you so much for your thoughts and for your leadership in our field. Very much appreciated.